I guess we're about to go get our brains melted in the run-up to Nordcry and learn what the frick a moon wheel actually is, because all we know so far is that Nordcry characters have them. They're probably not granted by Archons, they're probably granted by the moon goddesses, right? Let's delve in and see what Ashikai has to say for us today, dude.
Destination is Nordcry, and the people there worship a moon goddess. I definitely expected our first Nordcry character to at least give us a little bit of moon lore alongside their appearance.
And the funny thing is, I actually feel like Anefa gave us a boatload of moon lore, although a lot of it is just unconfirmed right now because Dragon Lords...
Anefa definitely met that expectation, but what I was not expecting was all of the vision lore that came with this round of lunar intel.
Yup.
But it does make sense because we now know that visions originally came from the moons. In light of this
The moon!
revelation, I think we can safely assume that we'll be learning a lot more about visions in this upcoming patch cycle.
Yep.
So in preparation for this inevitable lore dump, I thought now would be a great time to go over all the information we currently have about visions, revisit some old theories about them, and introduce a couple of new ones.
Can we keep it a buck and just say the delusions here, or the Fatui visions, I guess, just look like the coolest by far?
And just as an FYI before we begin, if you have not played the Nordcry Interlude Archon quest, read Anefa's character stories, or her weapon lore, do at least one of those things before watching this.
We've done it.
Or proceed at your own risk. All other spoiler warnings will be in the description box alongside timestamps, citations, attributions, and links to theories that I'm going to reference in this video, so make sure to check those out. And with that, we are ready to begin, so let's kick things off by going over everything that we know about visions.
Let's do it.
Or perhaps I should call them by their original name, moon wheels.
Well, they're the first that we know of for now. Something could have even come before moon wheels, I guess.
Up until this point, we've been told that
Like Nibelung balls or something, you know? Like, I mean, he put the moons in the sky. I mean, it could be.
visions, also known as the eyes of God, are crystallized manifestations of a person's will or ambition combined with a fragment of an Archon's elemental authority. Not regional authority, but elemental authority. And the combination of these two things grants the wielder some level of control over elemental energy. This granting of elemental authority via visions appears to be involuntary, though, as Archons don't actually have any control over who gets a fragment of their authority.
True, and I'm pretty sure even if it's somebody that doesn't necessarily deserve a vision, they still have to grant it, right?
Nor do they know why a vision is being granted in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in the past, Venti has described visions as external organs, implying that they are quite literally a functional part of a person's body. This could be why separating a person from their vision can cause the wielder, also known as an allogene, to experience a massive shift in their personality. A part of their body has literally gone missing. Now, conventional wisdom tells us that visions can only be controlled by their respective allogene. That is to say, someone like Noelle can't pick up Jean's vision and use it effectively, or at all. This is partly why when an allogene dies, their vision goes dark and defaults to a clear white crystal that's known as a masterless vision.
That's it, not visionless vision. It's blind, basically. Isn't that interesting as well? Actually, I've never thought about this. Isn't it interesting that when a vision dies, it goes like this cloudy white pearlescent color, and when somebody goes blind, like by natural means, even like an animal, their eyes also go this color. I've just thought of that. That's interesting.
All that said, it is possible to reactivate a masterless vision, but it's a pretty rare phenomenon and the requirements to do so are unknown. Now, someone is definitely going to point out that Kazuha activated his friend's vision and his friend is dead, and so at that moment he was actually using two visions, but that is an anomaly. What it does show us, though, is that it is
Yeah, I was going to say, it might be an anomaly, but it did happen.
possible for an allogene to activate a masterless vision, and that's the only known way to use two visions at once. Like, we've never seen an allogene swap visions with somebody else, yet. Also on our list of things that are presumably impossible is destroying a vision, or at least it's never happened in recorded history. Now, this was basically everything we knew about visions up until the release of Fontaine. Although we were able to correctly speculate about some other things about visions, like how visions are tied to a person's fate. We were able to confirm these theories during Fontaine, thanks to Nouvelette's character stories, which explicitly confirmed that visions were indeed tied to fate itself, which was also tied to the stars that made up the constellations of the false sky.
You know, there's a lot of discourse around in the community right now about what region has been the worst, like in Genshin. I can understand when people say Natlan, like I get it to an extent because it's so different to everything we've had. I don't agree with it, but I can understand their point of view to an extent. A lot of people say Inazuma because they just really didn't like the exploration and the story in Inazuma, and I totally understand that as well. But bro, there's so many people that genuinely think Fontaine was the worst like patch cycles in Genshin, and I don't understand that. I can't wrap my head around people thinking Fontaine is literally the worst in the game. I can't.
Lore in Nouvelette's character stories was the last bit of information we got about visions until Anefa arrived and activated her moon wheel, which is apparently a proto-vision, like a precursor to the modern visions. Now, although there are slight differences between a moon wheel and a vision,
I can't remember this off the top of my head. Did Anefa have the moon wheel before she got it in that cutscene, or was that like the Wanderer moment where she got the moon wheel granted to her? She got it granted to her, right? Which means the power to bestow a moon wheel upon somebody is still very much a possibility, a plausibility.
They're effectively the same thing. So we can reasonably say that visions are moon wheels and moon wheels are visions. And this is probably my favorite lore drop of all time. Because not only does this confirm some old theories with the true nature of visions, which we're definitely going to talk about in a little bit, but it also resolves some of ancient Teyvat's greatest historical mysteries. And some of you are going to be very confused as to why I say that. But the truth is that the history of visions can be found in the ancient history of Teyvat. So if we want to understand everything there is to know about visions and how they work and where they came from and all that kind of stuff, we need to understand Teyvat's history. And we need to start at the very, very beginning.
Sweet.
When the planet
Nibelung's world, interesting. I also only just realized how the Inazuma vision does look like it has 3 moons on the vision casing. I never realized that.
of Teyvat first appeared, a dragon was born alongside it. That dragon was Nibelung. Now, mythologically speaking, dragons are manifestations of nature, so let's consider Nibelung to be the original god that governs over the natural order, and all of the life forms that appear on his planet to be subservient to the laws of nature that he governs. It's a reasonable assumption and it fits with what we know. So Nibelung loved all life on his planet, the most powerful of which were the 7 dragon sovereigns who each held dominion over some aspect of nature. Nouvelette, for example, regulated the primordial sea from which all life was born, which made him kind of like the original god of life.
I know I'm pausing a lot, but I'm also trying to take in as much information as I can before I pause the next time, so let this sit in my brain for a sec.
While Shriekwaddle played guardian to Phlogiston, a raw form of programmable matter capable of storing pure information. One day, a disembodied space traveler known only as the Voyager stumbled upon Teyvat and was so impressed by this world's civilization and the will of the dragon that governed it that she decided to do something she never does and intervened. She had witnessed the destruction of countless worlds during her millennia floating through the
including her own, which was fucking sad as shit, by the way.
Cosmos, and she didn't want to see this one meet the same fate. So she met with Nibelung and warned him that Teyvat was destined for ruin. But because she didn't want to see him die, she asked him to abandon Teyvat and travel the cosmos with her. But he refused.
Honestly, Skirt being Cryo feels odd. I mean, it was confirmed why. She's not actually Cryo. She is technically Abyssal, and she disguises it as Cryo so she can blend in to fit in Teyvat. It makes sense lore-wise.
Claiming that the life found on his little planet was the very meaning of the universe itself, and he would not abandon his people. So the Voyager left him be and promised to return one day to check in on him. But her words haunted Nibelung. He didn't want his people to fall to ruin, as the Voyager predicted, so it seems as though he decided to initiate a space program, reasoning that if the world was destined for destruction, then he could at least take his people.
This is interesting. I've never thought of it as a fucking space program.
With him somewhere else. So likely on Nibelung's orders, Dragonkind began working on space elevators and shuttles and satellites that could take them far beyond the stars. But around this time, for reasons that we're not aware of, Nibelung decided to leave his position and investigate something on his own. Just temporarily, he intended to come back, but he certainly couldn't leave the world unattended. Someone needed to govern the cycle of the world in his place. Someone like a regent. So he created the 3 moons from the Earth and set them aloft in the sky.
Yeah, there's a cool theory that the moons are actually created from other parts of the world. So Teyvat is the continent, but people do theorize that the reason why Teyvat is the only realistically like known continent is because the other landmass was used by Nibelung to put the moons in the sky. Like, that is what it is. Could be very cool.
These moons were governed by 3 sisters named Arya, Sonnet, and Canon, or alternatively, Aurlos, Solnari, and
Darcy,
Canon. This means we have actual confirmation that the moons and the 3 moon sisters that used to rule Teyvat were dragons, or at least draconic creations. And that means it's very likely that their subordinates, the Seelies, also known as angels, were also draconic. this is important information for later.
Okay.
So, while the Moon Sisters were in charge of the world, a reaver descended from beyond the sky, and with the assistance of 4 shades that they made of themselves, the Moon Sisters submitted to them and allowed the reaver to seize Nibelung's throne and become what we know of as the Heavenly Principles.
Yes.
And then they terraformed the land and introduced a new species called humans to the world. Or as Wahaklhun Ubakan says, they just kind of tossed humans into Teyvat. Dragonkind believed that the moon goddesses betrayed them, and although they never stopped struggling against the new world order established by the Heavenly Principles and enforced by the 4 shades and the 3 moons, they were unable to do anything without the help of their king. They waged a devastating war against heaven and lost. When Nibelung finally returned from whatever it was he thought he was supposed to be doing, he was furious to discover that his daughters apparently betrayed him and all of his kind.
Poor Nibelung, dude. I hope we get more Nibelungs. I want to see Nibelung. I can't be the only one, right? I want to see what he actually full-on looked like in like a fully rendered animated cutscene, not just on murals on a wall.
And he was even more upset about the existence of this reaver that became the Heavenly Principles after stealing his throne. But he quickly came to the conclusion that the only way he was going to get his throne back was to retrieve forbidden knowledge from the abyss. So he left Teyvat once again. Now we're going to pause this history lesson for a second because this is the moment in history when
this is where it's going to get very interesting.
Visions first appeared on Teyvat. But they didn't appear as visions at first. They appeared as their precursor, the Moon Wheels.
Interesting.
The
Here we go.
information that we got from the Nodcry interlude quest took place during this point in the timeline where Nibelung disappeared to retrieve forbidden knowledge and the Moon Sisters started working for the Heavenly Principles. The 3 of them collaborated with their new master to develop crystalline ritual objects that they gifted to their human followers so that they could communicate with them directly.
Do you ever think, I wonder what Nuvela and Zhongli feel about Nodcry and the moon stuff and everything like that? I do wonder. I feel like that could be such an interesting little side story to happen where they discover where we're going and what we're doing and see what they actually think about the whole thing. Because they could be on either end of the spectrum. They could hate the moons and the moon goddesses and shit, or they could fucking love them. Oh, it could be anything.
These crystals were called moon wheels and leveraged some purer form of power similar to phlogiston. Now, I think this purer form of power refers to the power of wishes because a wish is what binds a moon wheel to its wielder. This is why moon wheels and visions appear before humans with powerful desires or ambitions. Those are considered wishes. Now, according to Natlan's 8th Dragon Lord, it's an Allegene's soul that's anchored to a moon wheel through a wish. And the combination of these 3 things allows an Allegene to manipulate elemental energy. So basically, a moon wheel is a foci or medium through which one can use their soul to control elemental energy. The wish is something like a contract or a key that allows the interaction to take place. I find this revelation to be particularly funny because in the Genshin comic, you're gonna notice that some of the close-up shots of visions don't have an elemental symbol in them.
Holy fuck. Bro, I've never noticed this. What the hell? This one's very cool. It's got like the triangle and then the compass star. Maybe it looks very hexagon circle. I never noticed that. How have I never noticed that?
Instead, they have a star, and we often wish on stars, so stars represent wishes. And this comic came out way before the game did, so even back then, Hoyo knew exactly how they wanted visions to work. Now, I have been talking about moon wheels and visions as if they're interchangeable things, but it does seem like Hoyo wants to differentiate them a little bit.
100%.
Drip marketing material for Nodcry labeled characters like Lalma and Flynn's as possessing a moon wheel, while Aino has a regular vision. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the difference is between the two, and I'm sure they're going to tell us when we get to Nodcry, but if I had to take a guess, you know how visions require Archons to grant a fragment of their elemental authority to an Allegene? Well, I think the source of authority is where the difference between visions and moon wheels lie. Moon wheels likely contain lunar authority, while visions get authority from Archons.
I think that's likely the case, but then it poses the question, which Archon granted Aino the vision then?
Cry worship.
And why?
A moon
I know they don't know why, but it is an interesting tidbit.
goddess of sorts, so it stands to reason that Columbina has been granting fragments of her lunar authority to the people there. This would imply that moons are omni-element though, as Archons grant authority fragments by element type and not by region, and what's going on in Nodcry is that moon wheels are being granted by region and not really by element. I'm also not 100% sure on how or...
Well, I don't know about that. I think yes, but I do also think that the moon goddesses probably possess the element of light as well to a certain extent, right? Like the all-encompassing element, or at least a reflection of it. I mean, we know that the moon, the reason moonlight happens is because light reflects from the surface of the moon, right? It's not because the moon itself generates light, so... Yeah, I don't know.
Where
We'll see.
the whole authority aspect of moon wheels and visions comes into play.
Yep.
So if this really does end up being the difference between a vision and a moon wheel, I'm sure we're gonna learn more about this particular mechanic once we get to Not Cry. But for now, this is my best guess. And I feel pretty okay about it given that the reactions you get from Not Cry characters are lunar reactions,
Yep.
and not just regular elemental reactions. And with that, we now know
Can't wait for Solar Burn in 8.3.
how visions work and where they came from. Those are two really big mysteries that are almost completely solved. But we can't go back to our history lesson just yet, because the term moon wheel isn't just a name for proto-visions, it's also a name for the moons themselves. And to explain why that matters, I need you to follow me into speculative territory for a little bit, and then we can go back to the history lesson. Okay, so according to multiple sources, including the Song of the Welcome Moon preview trailers and web event, the Moon Sisters were responsible for, quote, weaving the threads of fate, which backs up the popular theory that the Moon Sisters are indeed entities comparable to the Norse Norns or the Greek Morai, especially
Absolutely.
since both groups of sisters were known for weaving the threads of fate.
Yeah, it was like one would weave the threads, one would measure the threads, and one would cut them, like death and stuff like that, right? Or am I... maybe it was something slightly
For
different.
the Morai, it was more like they were spinning the threads of fate on a spinning wheel, while the Norns wove a web of fate from the threads representing human lives.
Yeah.
But spinning and weaving are disciplines that go hand in hand, so blending these two concepts just makes sense. I actually wrote a whole theory about this that's aged exceptionally well, so if you want more details about all this spinning and weaving and fate stuff, you can check it out.
This was a great video.
But remember, Nibelung created the moons to govern the cycles of the world in his place. That way he could go off and do other things. But if the moons are supposed to be governing the cycles of the world in Nibelung's place, but they also are responsible for weaving the threads of fate, then that suggests that the whole weaving the threads of fate thing was originally Nibelung's power.
Absolutely.
Fate should have been Nibelung's original authority. Now, according to Fractured Halo, the Heavenly Principles gained possession of the vows upon which the three caused the world to turn. These should be the three Moon Sisters. So the Heavenly Principles somehow convinced the Moon Sisters to swear allegiance to them, which is how they got control over this new order of fate that they've imposed over Teyvat, and it's also the reason why the dragons call their own goddesses traitors. They handed over the original Dragon King's power to this new stranger. And on top of all that, when Nouvelette's character story says that the Heavenly
That is kind of crazy when you think about it. They did kind of fuck him over hella.
Principles had their functions ruined and could no longer use their absolute authority to suppress the original order of the world, he may be describing this incident where the moons were shattered during the Great War of Vengeance. Because if the Heavenly Principles loses access to the power of the moons, then they lose access to the power of fate directly. And the timeline we have supports this conclusion. So before we continue this train of thought, let's finish our little history lesson.
Sweet. The
After
Great
the
War of
Heavenly
Vengeance.
Principles conquered dragonkind, gained the vows of the moons, established human civilization, and enslaved the Seelie/Angel race, the Voyager returned to Teyvat. But Nibelung was nowhere to be found because he had left to find forbidden knowledge so he could defeat the Heavenly Principles and, reclaim his throne. Confused as to her friend's absence, the Voyager possessed the body of a young man, and through a funny series of events, they met the first angel who was imprisoned underground. The first angel fell in love with the Voyager in a human shell, and after sharing their grievances over Teyvat's new bullshit government, they decided to rebel against the Heavenly Principles.
What is it? Bullshit government?
And the moons both witnessed and apparently quietly approved of this plan, which does suggest that the moons were either coerced into serving the Heavenly Principles or had regrets over the contract that they signed. Now, this is where things get a little murky.
Contract, huh?
Because a lot of stuff happens during this aptly named funerary year. Just so we don't get confused, I'm gonna tell you what we know for sure happened first, and then I'm gonna tell you my interpretation. So
that is the best way to do it for these videos, especially Ashikai videos, because here's the thing, right? I love Ashikai lore, but sometimes things get so convoluted when it's referencing things that are not in the game, like religion and different fucking political spheres and stuff. So I think it's good to talk about what is factually proven in the game so far and what we know for a fact is true, and then go into the other stuff. I think it flows a lot nicer.
just stick with me here. The funerary year starts with the Voyager and the first angel inciting the Angel Rebellion against the Heavenly Principles. At some point during this rebellion, the second throne of heaven arrives and the rebellion turns into a war. Nibelung also returns around this time, bringing the abyss and forbidden knowledge into Teyvat, which inspires the remaining dragon sovereigns to rejoin the war to get their revenge against the usurper. This is how it got named the Great War of Vengeance. It got the funerary year name because a lot of stuff died. But the Angel's rebellion failed. The heavenly principles unleashed the celestial nails, which rendered the angels into formless Seelies and mended the land that was corrupted by the abyss that Nibelung brought with him.
Yeah, we also just need more nail lore, bro, at this point. I'm gonna keep it, but we just need celestial lore. That's pretty much all we're missing at this point, I feel like. That hasn't been touched on at all, is just specifically celestial stuff.
Both the Voyager and the first angel were punished for their actions. They were separated from each other and stripped of their memories. Nibelung also allegedly died around this time, and at some point towards the end of this war, the moons shattered and the heavenly principles created the Nosis and automated vision distribution system with the help of, the one who came after. We don't know who the
For those who come after, oh my god, now I'm fucking depressed again, dude. Fuck you.
one who came after is, although there's a lot of speculation that we'll talk about in a second. But that actually brings us right up to the start of the Archon War, which we're not going to go into because it's not really relevant.
No!
Now, once again,
I
this
love
is
Archon
everything
War
that
stuff.
we know for sure happened. The facts as we have them. So
Okay.
now I'm going to tell you what I
Yo,
think
Sack, happy birthday!
actually went down based on these facts. The
Okay.
funerary year definitely starts with the Voyager and the first angel inciting the angel rebellion against the heavenly principles. This is very, very similar to how Lucifer led the angels in the War of Heaven found in the Bible. In this case, Lucifer should be the Voyager, as both are referred to as stars in one capacity or another. Now, because I'm thinking of Voyager as a Lucifer archetype, I also think Voyager is the so-called second throne of heaven because Lucifer was trying to be the second throne of heaven,
Makes
the
sense.
heir of God. It's very simple logic, yes, but stick with me. I think the angel rebellion failed fairly quickly into the funerary year because the moons witnessed the heavenly principles stripping both the Voyager and the first angel of their memories and separating them, which means that this failure has to come before Nibelung arrives with the abyss, because it's only upon his arrival that the moons are shattered. So the angel rebellion fails, and then Nibelung returns to shatter the moons, and the remaining dragon sovereigns join in, seeking to eke out revenge against the heavenly principles. That's the end of the angel rebellion and the beginning of the Great War of Vengeance.
That lines up. I think that makes perfect sense.
I think the two kind of blend together a little bit, but I do believe that they're two separate incidents.
I agree.
Now, I also think that the devastation brought by the abyss corrupted Nibelung was so great that the heavenly principles was forced to cast down the celestial nails. These nails purified the abyssal energy, destroyed the bodies of the rebellious angels as a side effect, and also maybe as punishment, and likely killed Nibelung directly. Whatever
Yeah.
angels survived the onslaught,
I do also like the theory that the nails are there, like you say in chat as well, to pin down the body of Nibelung and keep him like concealed beneath the earth. Somebody made a map of where the nails, the current like confirmed nails, are pinned down into Teyvat or like above Teyvat, and where they think the other ones are, and it could easily make like the outline of a dragon with the wings and stuff. I think it's a super sick theory, and I would like to see it be brought to life.
like Nabu Malikata, were exiled from heaven and wandered the land. Now, at the end of all this chaos, the heavenly principles and the quote, one who came after created the seven Nosis together, and that is a pretty important event. But we're gonna come back to this because there's a more important event that's flying under the radar here. Based on the story in Moonpiercer,
When it is the evidence of bones, I mean, we kind of did in one of the fucking Natlan quests underground, right, with the huge ass dragon skeleton. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was also underneath it now. I'm trying to remember specifically.
when the moons were shattered, the dust eventually fell to earth and settled within the hearts of humans. To quote Moonpiercer, those who breathe in the dust of the moons will have a pearl-like moon in their hearts. And I've taken this to mean that because the moons shattered, the big moon wheels fragmented and became little moon wheels that grow inside of the hearts of people. Because as we talked about earlier, the moon wheels were originally given by the moons to their followers. And
Yep.
if the dust of the moons can coagulate inside of a person and form a proper moon wheel, then we can assume that the moon wheels are, at their core, literal fragments of the moons themselves. So
That-
in theory, if someone were to come to possess a fragment of the moon itself, then they may be able to tap into that, quote, purer form of power that moon wheels and visions are based on. Not necessarily lunar authority exactly, because they're not really around anymore, but a fragment of the ability once thought to be exclusive to the moons, the power to weave fate, which means that those who possess a moon wheel, also known as a vision, possess a fragment of the moon wheel of fate. And the reason I'm very confident about this interpretation is because the relevant mythology that Hoyo appears to be referencing supports this idea.
Oh no, we're getting into mythology. Holy fuck. I don't know if I agree with that. Maybe this will convince me, but I mean, it makes sense on a very surface level, but I feel like if you have even a fragment of the power to affect fate, that seems kind of fucking ridiculous, no?
Since we know that the moons were dragons or draconic in nature, the little crystalline pearls gifted to humans that allow them to use draconic power should, by definition, be considered dragon pearls.
True.
I've made a whole video about how visions are dragon pearls, so if you want a more robust argument aside from this moon stuff, you can check that out. Now, in Chinese mythology, dragons generally possess a flaming pearl that contains their knowledge and power and wisdom.
Yeah.
Now, phlogiston is a flaming substance that contains both knowledge and power, and it was the basis for the development of the elemental system that visions or moon wheels manipulate. So thinking of visions as flaming dragon pearls is reasonable, I think. Now, it's
I agree.
important to note that these flaming pearls are also called wish-granting pearls, or mani gems in dharmic religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, because they grant wishes. And I don't know about you, but that kind of sounds like how a vision leverages a powerful wish to manipulate the elemental powers of the world. In fact, both visions and mani gems can purify tainted water, which in Genshin's case is probably the abyss, because it's usually referred to in terms of water, like when it's called the black tide. Granted, vision wielders don't so much purify the abyss as much as they repel it, but it's close enough for our purposes.
Repelling the abyss, true. Draco said, considering he was using the power of the abyss, meaning Nibelung, I'd assume that they slowly wasted away into abyssal energy. True, and then the nails are repelling that abyssal energy. That could definitely be the case as well.
Now, mani gems were also considered to be one of the 7 treasures of the Chakravarti, or wheel-turning king, who in this case should be Nibelung, because he was the one who originally had the power over the Wheel of Fate that he then passed down to his lunar daughters. In the wheel that a Chakravarti turns is called the Wheel of Dharma, which you can think of as the wheel of the world's fate.
Okay.
That's not a totally accurate comparison because such a powerful religious symbol comes with a lot of nuances, but it'll do for now. Interestingly, this wheel is considered to be both the wheel of the Chakravarti solar chariot, as it is akin to a sun disk, as well as an eye that lights up and witnesses the world. And
Always desperate, dude. Always gotta be one.
this reminds me a lot of Shriquattle's golden entreaties because he was a fire dragon who forged the golden entreaties from his own eye. And the entreaties were not just the control hub for Huitzilopochtli, but according to Kukulkan, they were also a means to monitor and anchor reality. Now then, the Wheel of Dharma is also considered to be one of the main symbols of Vishnu, who, as part of the Trimurti, is considered to be one of the 3 facets of a singular supreme being, the other 2 facets being Brahma and Shiva. Collectively, they're called Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, but I'm gonna just call them Nibelung. Now, if you look at the center of the Wheel of Dharma,
Wait, what? This is where I get fucking lost, bro. Not gonna cap.
singular supreme being, the other 2 facets being Brahma and Shiva. Collectively, they're called Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, but I'm gonna just call them Nibelung. Now, if you look at the center of the Wheel of Dharma, you're gonna notice a somewhat familiar symbol, like a yin-yang with 3 spinny bits instead of 2. This symbol is called a Genkail, and it has a lot of associations and meanings that you can look up on your own, but for today, I'm only really concerned with the Genkail's interpretation of the triple-eyed wish-granting gem of the Chakravarti. So a wish-granting
Flows off the tongue.
gem of fate that's associated with eyes sounds a lot like a vision or a moon wheel, which means that we could interpret this as suggesting that Teyvat's moons were technically massive visions, like the Mani gems that were at the center of Nibelung's giant cosmic Dharma wheel. And I find this association super funny because in the Nordic traditions, Mani is actually the name of the moon god, just straight up. I'm only really mentioning that because Nibelung's name comes from Germanic myths rather than, Greek or Hindu. But Hoyo really likes their mythology smoothie, so. Anyway, the moons being the Genkail of the Dharmic wheel, which is typically seen as the wheel of the solar chariot, is probably the reason why some legends in Teyvat also talk about a lunar chariot instead of a solar one. At some point, that solar chariot wheel of Dharma was given to the moons at the center and became the lunar chariot. So whenever
Do you think we'll ever get sun lore in Genshin? We seem to be getting the moon lore now, but the moon's also been referenced a shit ton during the game's early stages too. I feel like the sun is a natural part of Teyvat in a lot of people's eyes, but I feel like that's obviously not the case? Like, who put the sun in the sky? Who is God, basically? Because the sun is also, it has to have more lore than the moons, right? I mean, the whole book before sun and moon, we gotta get sun lore at some point, but the question is fucking when? There's not even that long left.
We see a reference to the lunar chariot of Teyvat being overturned. What we're actually witnessing is a story about the wheel of fate being overturned when the moons were shattered. Now, I'm not changing the subject, I promise, but you know how I pitched the idea that the second throne, who is also probably the second descender, might be the Voyager? Well,
yes.
Technically speaking, the Voyager was the second to arrive in Teyvat from beyond the sky, with the Heavenly Principles, or the Reaver, being the first. Technically speaking, Nibelung was the third to arrive after his initial departure, which means that it's very likely that Nibelung was the third.
Oh, fucking hell, here we go again, dude. I don't know anymore where I sit on this theory that Nibelung is the third descender and that the Nosis remains are created from the remains of Nibelung. I don't know where I stand on it anymore because the lore around that fact is so fucking convoluted still. Yeah, but tons of people made this theory before. I believed it at a certain point, then I didn't believe it. Now I'm kind of on the fence. If he left and came back, was he really the third that came? If he just took a fucking vacation? Like, I don't know.
His initial departure, which means that it's very likely that Nibelung was the third descender, despite being a dragon that was actually born alongside the world itself.
Exactly. It just doesn't. Oh, dude, I don't know. I feel like now, at the point that we're at, it makes less sense for Nibelung to be the third descender.
The original ruler of the world. Now, Nibelung as the third descender was a very popular theory that I was skeptical of for a very long time, but I am on board with it now, not just because of this order of operations thing, but because
so we're kind of opposites here.
Voyager was the first to warn Nibelung about the Abyss's existence and how it could threaten the world itself. So the Voyager is likely somewhat anti-Abyss, or they at least believe it to be a power that's too great for anyone to control or oppose. So my hypothesis...
Descendants have the will to change the world, so I believe it. Yeah, but the thing is, Nibelung had that before the Voyager came along then, right? So why would he be the third descender instead of, like, the first, right? I don't even think he's the first. I don't know. I don't know. It's too convoluted right now.
This is that the Voyager and the Heavenly Principles worked together to divvy up Nibelung's remains into the 7 Nosis, because Nibelung had been corrupted by the Abyss and could no longer be trusted with the fate of the world. And we know that the Nosis were made from the remains of the third descender, which means that the only one who could come later to help the first descender, aka the Heavenly Principles, make the Nosis, should have been the second descender, right? And the Voyager seems like a very good candidate for that, especially if they don't remember the first angel, and because they've traveled the cosmos for millennia. They probably know all sorts of really neat tricks about how the universe works, and maybe that includes how to divvy up pieces of dragon power. Now, we've talked a lot in the past about how the Nosis are chess pieces, and we've debated at length which piece is which Nosis, or if all the Nosis are kings and whatnot, but I want to ignore the whole chess piece thing for a second and pitch an entirely new idea.
Oh god, I feel like my world's gonna be fucking flipped upside down if she says some outlandish shit here.
What if the Nosis are actually the spokes of the Wheel of Dharma, and they were extracted from Nibelung and distributed to the Archons who play their role in helping maintain the Wheel of Fate? So if we think of the Nosis as...
Okay, I'm willing to hear this out, but I think they're just chess pieces. I think it just makes sense that they're chess pieces, especially considering the Fatui Winter Nights Lazor trailer where they're playing chess and there's a lot of references, and even the boss fight with the Hexen Circle. I like to believe they're just meant to resemble chess pieces.
As spokes of the Wheel of Dharma, then the Archons are sort of like stabilizing this wheel and allowing it to spin around its axis. And what's left of the Mani gems inside of humankind might be serving as the axis of the wheel. Or rather, all of these little Mani gems might be bound to the placeholder axis of the wheel, which in this case would be Irminsul, because Irminsul should be the axis mundi, or the axis of the world. And since Mani gems are related to souls, and Irminsul is basically a repository of all the souls, and it also connects everyone together through the ley lines, I think this idea checks out. If I'm right about that interpretation, then I think I understand what the Heavenly Principles has been trying to do with this whole vision system thing. See, if we assume that Nibelung is the triple Vishnu who possessed the Wheel of Fate, or Dharma, and his daughters were the triple Mani gems at the wheel's center, then perhaps the Heavenly Principles is Indra. Indra is a Hindu sky god, the king of the Devas, and the god of order who destroys evil. He's a very important deity, but he's not an almighty creator god, and that's kind of the point. Okay,
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit lost, but I'm still following along.
Neither is the Heavenly Principles. So the reason I'm talking about Indra is because there is a tale where the Mani Gem belongs to Indra, or at least Indra came into possession of the Mani Gems. And that's very reminiscent of how the moons pledged allegiance to the Heavenly Principles, providing that the moons are the Mani Gems. Now in this pledge,
yeah, I mean, they're obviously meant to resemble chess pieces. We know that for a fucking fact. So she's obviously saying that they could resemble the spokes of the wheel as well as chess pieces. I just don't know. I don't know, maybe.
Allegiance to the Heavenly Principles, providing that the moons are the Mani Gems. Now, in this tale, the Mani Gem actually fell to Earth during a war with the Asuras, and that allowed anyone who possessed it to grant their own wishes. And that sounds a lot like how the moons fell and settled within the hearts of humans, becoming wish-fulfilling visions.
Okay.
Now here's the other thing. A war with the Asuras is actually referenced directly in Genshin. It's in the book Legend of the Shattered Halberd. This is actually a super important series of books that we don't really have time to go into right now, but basically this series is suggesting that the war between the Heavenly Principles and the dragons is the same one as the one between the Celestial Emperor and the Asuras, which should be the same war as the one between Indra and the Asuras, which
Makes
means
sense.
that the Asuras are dragons, and the Legend of the Shattered Halberd must be alluding to an allegorical battle between Nibelung and the Heavenly Principles. Hey, future Ashikai here. Earlier in this theory, I suggested that Nibelung destroyed the moons in a fit of rage upon his return, but I need to add a couple of caveats to that. Would have added the caveats in earlier, but I only came to this conclusion because of the Legend of the Shattered Halberd stuff. Also, sorry for pronouncing Shattered Halberd wrong. The dyslexia got me this time. Anyway, according to
I didn't even notice.
Mitternach's Waltz, 2 moons were destroyed specifically by a, quote, sword that tore heaven asunder. Legend of the Shattered Halberd and Mitternach's Waltz are both connected to Fischl's stories, which is why I'm kind of lumping them in together. So if we continue with the assumption that the Legend of the Shattered Halberd is describing, allegorically at least, a battle between the returned abyss-afflicted Nibelung and the Heavenly Principles, then Mitternach's Waltz's description of the thing that destroyed the moons as a sword becomes quite interesting, because the Divine Halberd was shattered into a bunch of different swords. So I do think the Divine Halberd and the sword from Mitternach's Waltz are the same thing, especially since they were both considered weapons to be used against the divine. However, the description of the Nilapala Lotus says that it was an arrow.
Fucking hell. The fact that you can read 2 books and then to fucking get the combining law, you have to go pick a fucking Sumerian plant is wild to me.
Oh, that shot down the moons. And based on that description, it feels quite possible that the moons were actually shattered by the celestial nails that were allegedly launched by the Heavenly Principles. Although that does feel really weird without any supporting context, because the Heavenly Principles controlled the moons, so there was no real need for them to destroy the moons. And based on Nouvelette's character story, it sounds more like the Heavenly Principles had their functions ruined rather than ruined their own functions.
Okay.
If we assume the moons are their functions, then, that doesn't quite make much sense. But I want to point out that it's quite interesting that this weapon can be called a halberd, a bow and arrow, or a sword, because the flexibility in terms of how this weapon can be described makes it feel like it might be more representative of the will of Nibelung himself, and that this will was later split into the Nosis the same way the Divine Halberd was split into multiple swords in the novel. This theory is—
I assumed with the Nosis, it wasn't even the will that was split. I thought it was literally just created from the remains, which would be the elemental energy, not necessarily will.
Is made possible thanks to the Narzenkreutz's quest, which established the existence of the Sword of Reason, which represented a descender's world-shaping will, and that will could take on any shape, not just the shape of a sword. Anyway, I felt like I had to acknowledge that, mostly because the Nilapala Lotus description says that the arrow that apparently shattered the moons actually shot the gems off the wheels of the lunar chariot, which sounds a lot like the Genkil/Mani gems that adorn the Wheel of Dharma, which was also the wheel of a solar and lunar chariot, as we established earlier. I'm currently working on a theory about Fischl and—
Jesus Christ, brother. This happens every time I watch an Ashikai video. It's like a volcano waiting to erupt, and then it erupts, and I'm like, oh, it erupted.
Noticed this just before it went live, so I thought I'd just toss it in. Anyway, that's all I had to add. Back to Past Me. So just like Indra lost the Mani Gems to humans during a war with the Asuras, the Heavenly Principles lost the moons to humans during the Great War of Vengeance. And without the 3 moons to make up the axle of the fate wheel of Dharma, the Heavenly Principles wove a net. Indra's net. actually. Indra's net is a massive net that envelops the world wherein a gem is placed wherever the net's threads intersect. This creates a sort of web of fate. Incidentally, Indra's net hangs over Mount Meru, which in Genshin should be in Sumeru, which is also where Irminsul is.
Oh god.
Irminsul is effectively the axis of the world, not too dissimilar to the axle of a wheel, and its roots make a giant web or net known as the ley lines, which are reflected by the stars in the sky. Yeah. All allogenes have a constellation reflected in these stars, so every vision is directly connected to that web of stars in the sky. What I find most fascinating about this comparison is how Malwika's backup plan to save Natlan from the abyss was to pull all souls out of the ley lines to form a giant soul net barrier.
I remember
if visions are powered by souls, then is the world not already protected by Indra's soul net? So with Irminsul as the axle and the Nosis as the spokes, the wheel of fate continues to turn, and the world receives some level of protection from the abyss. This is the Heavenly Principles' backup plan to shelter the world without the power of fate in their hands.
I guess it does make sense, but then the Heavenly Principles not having the power of fate is kind of, I mean, it could be why it's kind of everything's just orchestrated by the shades and stuff, and the Hexen Circle and everybody else to get the Descenders to go through and change fate because they can't themselves. I guess, yeah, it does make sense.
And yet, I feel like the reason why people are encouraged to manifest their visions is so that the Heavenly Principles can harvest them upon their deaths.
Yeah, we know that's the thing, right? We know that the maybe not the whole purpose, but a big reason for the wishes. As soon as the wishes are fulfilled, the visions then kind of retort the power back to like whence they came, basically.
Moving the moon in their heart in order to reconstruct the moons themselves could be the end goal here. That could be why
We've never actually seen somebody fulfill their vision contract though, right? I'm pretty certain that's one of the many things we have yet to see in the game.
Archons are required to share a fragment of their authority when visions manifest. They need to keep the system going, and the people need to believe that visions are a divine blessing and not something that belongs to an individual. Because if you think about it, to possess a vision is to possess a fragment of the moon's power over fate.
Didn't Kazua's friend do that? No, bro just fucking died.
If the moons can control the fate of the whole world with 3 giant moon wheels, then perhaps an individual actually possesses the ability to control their own personal fate with a tiny fragment of the moon.
Okay.
Which also means that visions are tiny individual looms of fate. And I think that's pretty cool. I'm expecting a lot more vision lore coming up in the next region, and I'm especially interested in learning more about the
I don't know how I feel about visions just being little looms of fate, dude. I feel I don't know. I think a lot of stuff in this video was I agree with a lot of the stuff. I have some reservations and some questions about some of it as well, which is a good thing to have for theories. I thought it was a very well put together video, but there's some stuff that I just wouldn't want to be true as well. Like that visions being tiny little looms of fate. I feel like it kind of take away from the fact that we've been looking for this fucking loom of fate and learning so much about it just to find out, oh, by the way, everybody has a miniature version. Like, nah, I don't know. I don't really like that. But that was a great video.